I'd like to first thank Jordan Grant in my office for drafting this and pushing it, and as a nice touch, his parents are here today, so hi Mom and Dad, thanks for coming up. I'd also like to thank Senator Kristin Hill for her sponsorship in the Senate, Dr. Shay Rhodes from the Villanova Law Institute to address commercial sexual exploitation, the York County District Attorney Dave Sunday and the District Attorneys Association, the Pennsylvania Interfaith Justice Coalition, the Pennsylvania Family Institute, the Commonwealth's Victim Advocate Jennifer Storm, and my colleagues in the House for joining us today. Human trafficking is one of man's oldest and most vile trades, in which a human being is robbed of their basic rights and dignity. It is easy to think this crime is not found in our communities, but limited to larger cities. However, as the Polaris Project reported in 2016, there are cases of drug trafficking throughout the Commonwealth, from Erie to Philly, the Poconos to Greene County. In fact, the Polaris Project reported 152 cases of human trafficking in Pennsylvania. The true number of human trafficking cases is likely much higher, since this crime is vastly underreported and hidden among other crimes such as prostitution, theft, and drug dealing, among others. Human trafficking is a hidden epidemic. While Pennsylvania has made progress over the past few years in addressing this crime due to the tireless advocacy of many here on stage, there is always more to be done. Most victims of trafficking are between the ages of 12 and 14. Let me read that again. Most victims are between the ages of 12 and 14. These victims are minors and adults alike, male and female. They are forced to endure one of the most intimate forms of abuse, while predators profit off selling them as if they are a commodity. Their lives and personhood are treated as if they have less value than the cell phone most of us carry around today. The sex trade operates like any other trade based on the laws of supply and demand. Unfortunately, our crimes code often minimizes the penalties for those who purchase sex, thus not creating enough disincentive. In order to create this disincentive, the Commonwealth must bring full force of our justice system against those who would commit this heinous crime. This is why I'm introducing the Buyer Beware Act, which would mirror federal law on human trafficking. House Bill 12, the definition of trafficking would now include anyone who purchases sex from a victim of trafficking. The goal is to reduce the demand. And we all know as demand decreases, the supply will increase, and ultimately human trafficking will be put out of business. Or the supply will decrease, and ultimately human trafficking will be put out of business. Additionally, this legislation makes the penalty for trafficking or purchasing sex from a victim of trafficking a first-degree felony. Effectively, both traffickers and sex buyers, the bill will double the maximum prison time allowed currently under the law. The Buyer Beware Act also imposes stiff financial penalties for anyone who commits these crimes. These financial penalties are not limited to just trafficking, but will also extend to subsequent offenses for anyone caught patronizing a prostitute. Research shows that prostitution and trafficking are strongly linked, and by imposing fines on those who are caught patronizing prostitutes, the Commonwealth can reduce demand for this vile trade. Any fines under this section of the bill will be directed to help fund anti-trafficking programs across the state and assist child victims of the sex trade. It is our hope that by passing this bill into law, Pennsylvania will make it very clear to those who would purchase sex, buyer beware. Should you commit this crime, you will face the full force of our legal system. Now to discuss the bill further, and her view on it is my good friend, Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill. Kristin?
Good morning. It's hard to conceive of a crime more reprehensible than human trafficking. Although the offense is defined as the illegal transportation of people, in practice, this crime really involves destroying someone's identity and tearing apart their life. Victims face the prospect of enduring unspeakable violence, forced addiction, ongoing threats against family members, mutilation, isolation, sexual assault, and other atrocities committed by abusers in order to force compliance. This abuse, it often takes place over the course of months or even years against victims who average, as Representative Grove shared, between 12 and 14 years of age. The select few victims who escape this cycle of violence are left forever scarred by their torture. Those who never escape often leave behind a trail of devastated friends and family members who wake up every day wishing that their loved one would finally come home. The practice of human trafficking, it's modern-day slavery. Although it is not a new crime, the number of reported cases is growing at an alarming rate. Representative Grove shared a lot of the statistics. But that one thing that we need to come back and repeat is that you can't even assign a statistic to the mountains of cases that go unreported because the victims are too afraid or they're too ashamed of what they have suffered. Behind each one of those numbers is the face of a daughter or a son, a brother or a sister, a neighbor or a friend who is desperate to be released from their torment and return to their family and their loved ones. We owe it to them to do everything in our power to combat this vicious crime against humanity. Unfortunately, this crime is extremely difficult to fight, in large part because it's not restricted to any one part of the state or any single kind of community. As Representative Grove said, there are victims have been reported not only from those big cities, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, but in places like York and Lancaster and Harrisburg and Erie and State College, Williamsport, Altoona, and Allentown. The tentacles of this savage crime extend into small towns and neighborhoods where it's hidden in the shadows and victims are either too frightened to seek help or they're trapped by malicious cultural norms. The message should be clear. Human trafficking is real. It is dangerous, and it's happening in York County, right here in Harrisburg, in our communities throughout the Commonwealth. Those who deal in this awful crime are also growing more sophisticated and avoiding capture and prosecution. Every case that goes unsolved creates another hidden victim suffering in silence. And that's why we need to give our law enforcement community more tools to go after every single individual who is involved in this monstrous crime, not just those who buy and sell human beings, but those who abuse victims at every stage by patronizing or advertising their services. It's also why we need to strengthen the penalties against those who buy and sell human beings so these criminals can be held accountable for the unimaginable damage that they have caused by spending more years behind bars, which is exactly where they belong. In introducing this legislation, Representative Grove and I are not just trying to change a statute. We're engaging in the next phase of a battle against the face of true evil. It is our responsibility, both morally and constitutionally, to protect the victims of this insidious crime. William Wilberforce, who fought slavery in 19th century Europe, said, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never say that you did not know." We know the time has come to look the other way no more. The scope of the problem is too broad and the consequences too severe for us to continue to turn a blind eye, and we will take action now. Representative Grove, he's been a tremendous leader in the fight in the General Assembly for a long time, and I sincerely appreciate his leadership in the House on this issue. We're both extremely grateful to have the support of the Attorney General, the District Attorneys Association, especially our own York County District Attorney, Dave Sunday, victim advocacy organizations, law enforcement, and private citizens who are working to give a voice to the voiceless. This crisis is too pervasive, it's widespread to be solved by any one person or any single entity, but working together, I truly believe we can strike a critical blow against those who are making a living by promoting the suffering of others. I thank you all for joining us in this battle, and I look forward to working with all of you to fight against human trafficking and to prevent more innocent souls from falling victim to this horrific crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Next, we have Jennifer Storm, the Commonwealth Victim Advocate, and just appreciate the governor's press conference earlier this week on the initiatives he and his administration are tackling the human trafficking epidemic all across state government. Jennifer Storm, thank you so much for being here and doing what you do on a day-to-day basis.
It's fitting that we're here in January, which actually is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Thank you, Representative Grove, for having me here today and allowing victims and survivors to really be a part of reshaping the future here in Pennsylvania. I'm excited to stand here with you today with Senator Hill, our district attorney, and all the partners that are here with us today, from local victim service programs to Shay Rhodes, who has been a leader and voice and scholar on this issue for a very long time. Human trafficking is a horrific crime where perpetrators prey upon the vulnerability of children and drag them into a life often resembling that of a horror film. Oftentimes, victims are severely beaten, drugged, rendered unconscious, while unthinkable and vile criminal acts are perpetrated against them. Far too long, our system did not understand the reality of human trafficking and did not respond in kind to its victims. We criminalized and dismissed victims as offenders. We did not place the accountability where it needed to be, squarely upon the shoulders of the traffickers and those who patronized known businesses with minors and trafficked victims. I'm proud to say that Pennsylvania has come a long way in our education and implementation of laws that seek to protect these victims. Senate Bill 75 and the recent passage of Safe Harbor are examples of that strong commitment in Pennsylvania. But we still have a lot of work to do, and that's why we're here today. What we see with House Bill 12 is a Pennsylvania that stands with all victims and survivors of human trafficking, and perhaps most specifically, the children of these crimes. I want to point out some significant provisions within this bill. First, that a child victim of human trafficking will be able to testify against their offender from outside the courtroom, not having to sit surrounded by strangers in open court while providing some of the most intimate and horrific details of their lives. This is a true trauma-informed justice process. Pennsylvania has always been a leader in this area, and ensuring that this extends to child victims of human trafficking is just the natural next step. This protection, this consideration, tells victims and survivors we recognize the psychological and emotional trauma that they've already endured, and we as justice leaders and professionals seek to not further that harm. Second, this bill expands the definition of a child when we look at victim and witness treatment, changing the age from 16 to 18, allowing us to bring more victims and survivors under the shield of protection for law enforcement. House Bill 12 further emphasizes that the reduction of people as objects contributes to the acceptance of abuse and sexual assault in our society. Those who have been victims of these crimes deserve a justice system that recognizes the severity of what they have endured and that works to restore them as individuals, as well as our society as a whole. This is an important next step. I want to thank again all of the survivors and advocates and advocacy organizations, and most importantly, Representative Grove and Senator Hill for championing this issue and not letting it go. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Dave Sunday. I'm very biased. He is my DA, and I think he's the best district attorney we have in all 67 counties. District Attorney?
Thank you very much. Well, that was quite an intro. Thank you. My remarks will be brief today. I just want to thank everyone for being here for this. I want to thank Representative Grove and Senator Phillips-Hill for their outstanding work with regard to advocacy for human trafficking and for this bill in particular. Over the summer, they had, the entire York County delegation had hearings in York County on this issue specifically. And I think it's fantastic to see that as a result of the information they received at these hearings, that they acted on it and that they put together an amazing piece of legislation. That's how things should work, and so I'm very proud of that. Thank you, Seth and Kristin. Very briefly, from the point of a prosecutor, why is this even a problem? This is a tremendous problem in many, many different ways, starting with the fact that human trafficking and the victims that are the result of it are interwoven into what we deal with on a daily basis, not only with the human trafficking as it has been described, but also with regard to how it impacts and is impacted by the opioid epidemic. What we do far too often is we sort of chase the tail, meaning like, what can we do at the end of this? So for example, with regard to human trafficking, people that have been trafficked have been prosecuted for decades. So they've been prosecuted for prostitution, they've been prosecuted for theft, they've been prosecuted for many, many drug crimes, and far, far too often, the individuals who have, I will say, that have worked to fuel the fire of this, and those are the traffickers, have walked away free. And it's critical to understand that, because the people who are doing the trafficking are not just the individuals who might be supporting the person being trafficked with food or forcing them into servitude, but also the individuals who are fueling economically this entire situation, and those are the people that are soliciting the services. They are a critical part of this entire issue. They are fueling it. They are turning the wheels of it, because but for individuals seeking those services, this primarily wouldn't exist. And so the important part of this legislation is that it has given prosecutors, it will give prosecutors additional tools that we need to not only provide the services for the victims that have been trafficked, and to intervene in a manner that will hopefully give them the services they need so that they can go on and be productive citizens and have wonderful lives, but it will allow us to bring down the heavy hammer of justice on people who are trafficking others that, again, have thus far, for a long, long time, really gotten away with it. And so as a prosecutor, we only can do what we can with regard to the law. And the law essentially are arrows in the quiver of what we walk into a courtroom with every day. And this statute will give us a very important arrow that we can use, and a tool we can use to hopefully impact this unbelievably terrible, vile societal issue that we're dealing with. And I'm very thankful for everyone behind me, not only for their advocacy, but I'm thankful in particular for the crafting of this legislation in such a collaborative manner, so that we all as partners can work together to do what we can to combat, again, this vile, evil issue that is tearing our community apart. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. And before we close this out, I just want to thank again all the advocates here today for your continued leadership. Many of you have been in this battle for decades, and we truly appreciate all of the work that you've done to push this forward. With that, open up to any questions.
How prolific is human trafficking in our area?
You wanna hit that?
That's an excellent question, and that question actually is one that the answer may not be exactly what people want to hear. And the answer to that is we truly don't know. And the reason we truly don't know is because up until recently, and this is shame on us, but we have not really kept data on it. And also, when we talk about someone who was trafficked, the definition of someone who was trafficked has not, it sort of has been a amorphous definition that really did not lend itself to us being able to make determinations as to how many people are truly victims of this. And so what I can say with regard to what we deal with in our office, it certainly is prolific, and we are now seeing the true extent of it. But I think that with regard to specific statewide data, I hate to call her out, but she's right behind me. Oh, awesome. Perfect. There you go.
She was right up there.
Thank you.
Hi. I just want to thank you, Representative Grove and Senator Phillips-Hill, for your championing this issue. I'm Shay Rhodes. I'm the director and the co-founder of the CSE Institute at Villanova Law. Data is, like DA Sunday said, really difficult. This is an underground industry. But what my institute has been keeping track of, and with respect to Act 105, which is Pennsylvania's comprehensive human trafficking law that went into effect in September of 2014, we've tracked 33 convictions in the entire Commonwealth. We know that 26 cases have unfortunately been withdrawn throughout the Commonwealth. And we know that 14 additional cases have transitioned from state court to federal court. I don't know if that answers your question entirely. I can also tell you that in 2017, throughout the entire Commonwealth, there were 1,443 cases of prostitution. I can tell you that there were only 447 cases
of buying sex. So if you do the math a little bit and take those 1,443 cases, and if one of those individuals had roughly 5 sex buyers a day, and I think that that's a low number, that means that a little more than 7,200 people got away with the crime of buying sex. That's one day. So that just goes back to the point that DA Sunday made, that this is truly an underground industry, and statistics are really difficult to capture in real time.
It sounds like the Commonwealth is making a concerted effort to try to find these statistics and do better on that.
I think that's in fact the case. We've seen the numbers of prostitution arrests go down. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but they're still way too high in comparison to the numbers of those that buy sex. And what I also want to say with respect to what this bill is absolutely going to accomplish is that sex buyers should be prosecuted and convicted for the crime of buying sex, not given ARD, not have their charge changed to disorderly conduct or harassment, which is something else that my institute's been tracking statewide. The fines do not come into play unless an individual is convicted of the crime. And that's what's just so critical. We have victims and out there that need so much support, both children and adults. And the Safe Harbor bill that passed last session that's been in effect for only a couple of weeks now, that fund that was created will not be populated with money unless individuals are convicted for trafficking and for buying sex with those fines. Thanks.
Another example of why it's tough, if you are a drug dealer and you get someone hooked on heroin and they run out of money, you now may flip them to say, well, if you want your heroin, you're going to have to perform sex acts and collect money for that. Or there's cases, and I think there was a couple examples in our hearing of them dropping them off at a Walmart or a retail store and say, you know, here's the items you're going to go steal. And by the way, if you're caught, I'm just going to take off. So there may be retail theft that individuals are getting charged with. That's really a case of human trafficking. But it just goes under the radar because they're not going to mention that, you know, I'm actually addicted to a drug and my drug dealer is actually forcing me to go shoplift for drugs. It's just underneath, and that's one of the problems with collecting data on this. Any other questions? Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your tenacity in covering this. And again, thank you to the advocates on their tireless efforts in addressing human trafficking here in the Commonwealth and nationally. Thank you.